to some, it may look quite familiar. Anyhow, I think there are some interesting lessons learned and some interesting things to take away, especially on the side of procurement, which I think gets left out quite often from these finance discussions, which are, I would say, inherently linked. So we kind of extended the topic a bit on that. Eva, how much time do I have? Just out of curiosity.
You have around 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so there we go. So basically, what I've done, or what we've done, is basically analyze the state of 4 different cities in terms of their financing and procurement systems and strategies. Understand where the local barriers, the challenges, and the opportunities for funding of smart city projects. So we've looked at some 4 cities, so Dublin, Eindhoven, Manchester, and Miskolc, and I think it's quite relevant to Eindhoven and Manchester, being the lighthouse cities of Triangulum. And we've held some 33 on-site interviews with high-level stakeholders who are relevant for the topic of finance and procurement. Primarily, we looked at creative engagement and funding models for that would strengthen smart city initiatives, and what these are. We looked at how we could secure external funding through different regional banks, identifying different revenue generating or cost-cutting initiatives, and how we can maybe form revenue sharing agreements. How do we broker public-private partnerships, which are increasingly playing a central role in finance of smart cities, and smart city projects being extremely complex. In some cases, really require a wide stakeholder engagement, especially and also on the financing part. There are some interesting ideas for enabling larger city IT departments to become service providers for others. And by doing so, kind of, I guess, exporting some of their know-how, or selling or capitalizing on some of their know-how. I would say there are some good examples out of Manchester, for example, the New Economy, which I will mention later, or the DITSS out of Eindhoven, who focus on security, but I would say have piloted some pretty interesting projects that enable them to make them actually profitable. Then, of course, there is a topic of enabling the data monetization, leasing, financing. It's quite a standard topic, and then exchanging products and services for resources and references, and also facilitating multi-city initiatives, which, of course, Triangulum would be one of those examples. So back to the presentation. Now, I looked at a couple of applicable models that I will now go a bit deeper into. An interesting one is a revenue sharing agreement, which Eindhoven is piloting together with one of these waste recyclation investments, whereby the city of Eindhoven and this a private company basically will both share risks and revenues when this facility is in operation. There are some interesting topics for public-private partnerships. Of course, there are private buses that are being operated on the Manchester public infrastructure for some type of a levy or a fee or a payment, and it actually apparently is proving to be quite an efficient model. We see very similar cases of this in London, for example. Now, with regards to enabling successful city departments and organizations to become service providers to others and capitalizing on that, I've already mentioned the New Economy, which is basically a department within the Manchester organizational structure. And they are very successful in exporting their way of analyzing impact. So primarily the cost-benefit analysis or economic impact analysis to other cities, to such an extent where the city of Glasgow is using the Manchester methodology. Actually the national UK government is using this type of methodology. Sorry, you guys can probably, this is bothering you, okay. Up, whereby this, whereby the cities or the national governments are using a particular type of a methodology to actually improve the way they spend their resources. And this methodology has been developed at the city of Manchester. I've already mentioned the DITSS, which is an Eindhoven consultancy or an organization which has in the past managed to quite successfully enable small startups, for example, to develop sound sensors, and now these are being sold to the city of Lisbon, for example. They've developed some new types of fire alarms which are now being deployed throughout different cities in the Netherlands. Facilitating multi-city initiatives and aggregating demand. I think this is quite an interesting topic, where cities who are, for example, looking to procure street lights or smart street lamps or smart lampposts could actually work together and collaboratively procure these units. And what that means is, of course, with the larger scale or the economies of scale, the lower the costs of the more units you procure, the lower the costs per user then are. So of course that is I guess a logical thing to do. Data monetization comes up quite often and frequently, and I mean, there aren't really so many public institutions that are currently being extremely successful at monetizing data. And I mean, part of the reason why I think is that, and it kind of leads into actually a brand new research which the Fraunhofer is piloting at the moment, is that we don't actually understand the value of data. And I think unless you understand what the value of data and what types of combination of different data or data sets creates an added value, you can't really monetize it. So I mean, it's relatively simple for a private company like T-Mobile to privatize or to capitalize on selling you the data of how people move around. But when you actually want to provide a service as a city, or improve a service as a city, you first need to understand what type of value you'll be creating for the end users, and then look at how you actually can capture that. So this is, I would say, quite an interesting topic currently, and will remain so until we have some successful use cases. Leasing and financing, an interesting case. For example, Philips, the private company, provides streetlights at a discount rate for the city of LA, but on top of that, in exchange, actually runs their own network of 4G, 5G for the network provider AT&T, which actually makes it a very, very interesting business model. And of course, there's an exchange of products and services for resources and references. Some of these could be working with local universities within a living lab, such as the one in Eindhoven, where they are collaborating with local research and innovation institutions to actually develop new types of services, and are including the private sector quite extensively. Now, so this is kind of a summary. I'll make this the presentation available, of course, after, and I'm open to all the questions that may come from the side of the participants. Now, when we look at financial instruments and tools, we kind of tend to put them in 4 different brackets. So the first one would be purely government-based financing tools, be it grants, be it loans, but I mean, these are funds that come directly from the government. And of course, this includes the European Commission. There are other financial instruments, such as the development exactions. So those would be, for example, fees or levies that a city may impose on a property developer in exchange or in return for an investment into, for example, some type of a public infrastructure. Then we have public-private partnerships, and of course, private fund leveraging options are the last, and I will touch up on mainly the first, the third, and the fourth of these. Now, there has been an interesting study by a consultancy called Osborne Clarke, and they asked, key stakeholders within the smart city realm throughout the world, what do they think are the most likely sources of investments in the next 3 years? So this survey is about a year old, so we're I guess in the middle of this. But when you look at it, when you look at the results, I mean, a lot of it actually still comes from government or institutional type of funds, and you really see the private sector being not so significantly involved with sovereign wealth funds at the bottom, private equity bonds, and a little bit of crowdfunding. Now, I really think that this will change in the upcoming future, because I think cities really are running on the edge of what is fundable, and the public sector has played an incredible role in rolling out smart city projects. With the European Commission having spent what, €500 million already on lighthouse projects alone. And I think really the private sector needs to be a lot more actively involved. I guess from a financing perspective, what needs to be considered prior to funding a project is one needs to understand what are the sources of capital, what are the potential sources of capital, being it a loan, being it a grant, being it some type of a bond issue. Understanding what is the number of parties. Of course, that increases complexity, that might increase risk in the eyes of a bank or a financing partner. Understanding the ease of securing financing. So of course, there are some sources of capital, but how easily am I able to secure them as a city? What is the duration and the maturity of the financing? So the maturity of the project could be 5 years, could be 10 or 20 years, with some of these larger infrastructure projects lasting a long time. And what is the risk to investors? What is the risk to borrowers? I.e., in this case, it could be the city. What are the tax implications of the funding scheme? And what are the sources of repayment? How will I be able to repay, for example, a bond issue? So if I issue a green bond and invest that into some type of a green infrastructure, how will I make sure that I actually repay that to the bond holders? Now, for the government-based financing tools, so going back to those kind of 4 different groups, you've probably heard about the green bonds, something coming very heavily out of the Scandinavian countries, specifically Gothenburg is very successful in this. They are earmarked investments into low-carbon projects. So a city may issue a bond in the value of, for example, 200 million euros, and the money that it raises through that bond issue then actually gets reinvested only into low carbon projects. It cannot be invested into anything else. Now, Gothenburg doesn't do it because it needs those resources, but it does it because it actually stimulates some type of an ownership. So it engages with the investment and the financing institutions, as well as the users, because it is an interesting way of funding a project. It's very creative, and it engages people. It actually increases the acceptance levels. Social impact bonds, very similar to green bonds, except the investments that you'll be making are actually required to have, or are earmarked to be with some type of a social impact. And they're contingent on the social outcomes that usually the city agrees upon with the borrower or the investor. Then you have user fees. So those are relatively standard. You pay a fee to enter a public transportation. You buy a ticket. An interesting instrument, of course, are energy efficiency loans. We've seen these a lot in the United States, where individuals can actually take low interest loans that are then applicable to, for example, improvements to their homes. So, for example, in New York, this has been a very successful project where landowners who are usually or landlords who are usually owning properties, but those properties are rented out. They don't have a motivation to increase their energy efficiency. So in turn, what actually this does is, because it provides the money at a very low interest rate, it actually stimulates or enables the landlords to make that investment into, I don't know, for example, in this case, I think they were they were insulating the houses. So it engages them because the money is, or the resources are relatively accessible and cheap, so to say. The development exactions, I wouldn't go too much into detail in this. You might be familiar with linkage fees and tap fees being part of this. Linkage fees, usually the property developer would pay for linking into some type of a existing public infrastructure, and actually would be required to cover the negative externalities that are caused by extra traffic, extra congestion, and so forth. And then those funds would then, of course, be reused to fund some type of a smart project or an intelligent project further on. Public-private partnerships is the next group. So public-private partnerships in and of themselves are a relatively known, I guess, phenomenon. However, there are very, very many forms, and there is really never one type of a public-private partnership. There might be different types, different depths, different roles for the private and the public sector with regards to particular projects. The important is that both parties should seek to balance responsibilities, risks, and rewards equally. And I think this is quite important for smart cities because, as I said before, I mean, there are scarce resources that the public sector can actually invest into into smart city projects. And I think if more smart city projects should take place, and I think we all would like to see take place, we need to engage with the public sector. And I think the public-private partnerships are a very good vehicle to do that. And I think there are some examples of where it's being very successfully piloted. The last point in the public-private partnerships is the securitization and structured finance. So this is a relatively complicated instrument that actually would pool various revenue-generating assets, within cities, and then sell them as shares to investors. So in essence, if you're looking to leverage large amounts of capital from, for example, institutional investors such as pension funds, you don't actually go there to sell a particular project, but you sell a financial package to them, and you usually do that through a commercial bank. So the Church of Sweden, for example, who is one of the key pension funds in Sweden, only buys these through, for example, UBS or RBS or the Deutsche Bank, and these packaged investment portfolios basically then include the individual projects of cities. I think this is a very, very interesting way to fund projects, but it requires scale, and it requires the different cities and the different stakeholders to be able to actually deliver a relatively homogeneous investment package. And we can talk about this a little bit more in the question answer sessions part. Again, this was part of the survey, and I wanted to show this. I think it's quite interesting. It shows the overwhelming agreement among key stakeholders in the smart city realm around the world that public-private partnerships are absolutely crucial for smart cities and smart city infrastructure. Now, private funds, and I think this gets tossed around a lot, I mean, they include a number of different instruments, but I think on-bill financing, value capture, and the different philanthropic opportunities are one of the key ones, I would say. Now, on-bill financing is relatively straightforward. It's an individual homeowner, for example, makes an investment. An individual owner gets an improvement of their house. For example, they get a new heating unit, and that is paid for by a utility. But the utility then charges the customers the costs, which is broken down into their bill on the basis of the savings that they make. And basically recovers the initial investment that has to be made into the hardware or the equipment. Value capture is very interesting instrument. It's basically identification and capture of increased land value from resulting public investments in infrastructure. I would say so there has been a similar instrument in Manchester called the Betterment Levy, where the local councils would actually levy higher tax, or they would levy higher fees for making in public investments into infrastructure. And Eindhoven is working with some type of a similar instrument for their public investment in public infrastructure. I guess the last instrument from these private funds options is the philanthropic opportunities, which I mean, I guess they are not so efficiently tapped at the moment. And I wouldn't say every country, but there are in many countries high net worth individuals who have philanthropic tendencies, so to say, and one can there are examples, for example, of Dublin, you know, that engaged with an IBM startup, which basically is a not-for-profit organization that distributes some of the wealth from the IBM funds into intelligent infrastructure. And Dublin has been able to actually place solar panels on the rooftops of their public buildings, and use those to actually power or partly power those buildings. You know, I think that they had a philanthropic funding for that in the value of about €500,000. Yeah. So last, I know I'm running out of time, so very quickly, I tend to show this diagram because I think it's quite an interesting one. It looks at it shows the supply and the demand of capital, right? So on the right hand of the butterfly, you have the supply. So you have the different capital sources, be it the high net worth individuals or corporates or institutional investors and banks. Then you have the capital channels and intermediaries, where you have the brokers, the investment funds, the investment platforms. On the left-hand side, you have the purchasers of the impact, right? So you have the government purchases, the not-for-profit foundations, the ultimate beneficiaries, the cities, and you have the impact organizations. So grant-based organizations, you might have different government agencies, and in the middle you have investment vehicles, and those could be grants, loans, equity, bonds, and so forth. And I think what this butterfly shows that while it may sound very complicated, it really isn't that complicated. It's just that each project really requires a different type of supply of capital, and it requires different investment vehicles in order for it to be successful. I guess we can skip this. We can skip this. We can skip this, and we can skip this. I guess I just, for an inspiration, and I think this is quite interesting with regards to procurement and finance. Eindhoven is very good at applying kind of soft tools to quantify impact. So they have a methodology where they have kind of 10 key criteria that serve as a filter for only the best projects to pass through it. And I think understanding what the best project for you to make an investment smart is that it's good to have something like this before running a cost-benefit analysis on everything. Manchester is very, very innovative in the way they work with their ERDF funds. They have an evergreen fund which has been running for 20 years, I think, the evergreen one, and they actually they cover the gap between commercial banks and an actually successful project. So seed and mezzanine type of financing, where they enable you know, relatively riskier projects to actually take place, smart city projects to take place, and actually take on some of that risk in order to significantly improve, I guess, the overall development of the city or the growth of the city. And then they've actually managed to leverage £1 billion with their ERDF funds. So I think this type of a recycling of already public funds is quite interesting. And then Dublin has actually currently running 1.5 million euro startup fund, where they engage young people and increase public acceptance of city investments and interventions. And that's everything. So I'm open to questions now, or I don't know what the plan is.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this interesting presentation. If you have any questions now, you can use the chat or just open your microphone. If not, you can also ask them in the discussion. In the meantime, I will just hand over to Wench, the next presenter from Stavanger. So I will give you the moderation rights.
Hello. I'm showing my screen. Show my screen. Yeah. Where's my Hello?
Hello. I can hear
Okay.
you. I hope everybody else too.
So I can start my presentation?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. My name is Wenche Myrland and I work at the Rogaland County Council. And my presentation is not about the funding in general, it's more about what we do and our role in the project. And as you will see, we're located in the southwest corner of Norway. And from this map, it's not very good on this big screen I can see. Rogaland is on the southwest corner, and the other names are from other counties in Norway. Our county has approximately 473,000 inhabitants, and more than half of them live in the Stavanger area. Stavanger is the main city, the biggest city in the region. And I'm here presently together with Gerd Sehus from Stavanger, city of Stavanger, and Kathleen van den Berge, also from Stavanger. And our role is we're responsibility for public transport, all public transport, buses and boats, high schools, development of business and commerce, and county planning in various areas. We're 26 municipalities in our county, and there are 19 counties in Norway. And we're very experienced in international cooperation and picked up many interesting ideas and hopefully learn from them, and they may learn from us. We've also been lead partner in several or many Interreg projects. In Interreg projects, we receive 50% funding from the Norwegian government. It's at our disposal at the various secretariats that Interreg has. And usually we participate along with other counties along the coast. Sometimes they are based on our own core tasks, like the EXA, which is mentioned, you can see the logo at the bottom, that was about public transport authorization. And the two other logos are about shipping, supporting the shipping maritime transport. So I mentioned a few projects that we have participated in, and often as lead partner, sometimes as small partner. We just finished lead partner in a 7th framework project called Themis, and that's about sustainable living, energy efficient housing, retrofitting, rehabilitation of old houses and blocks. Spain and Hungary. In Hungary it was about older blocks from the communist time, refitting, rehabilitation of them, and renewable energy production. But you've probably heard about Columbus in the Triangulum project, and that's the public transport authority in our region. The company is 100% owned by us, the county council, and they are a transport authority. They organize bus and boat services and school transportation. They hire bus and boat companies, and they are operators, private partnerships. They're based on tenders. In the project, we have bought 3 electric buses, and they are actually the only buses owned by Columbus itself. The others are owned by the operators. but the operators now take care of the buses, running the buses on behalf of Columbus. And we have a goal of having the whole public transport network in the Stavanger region on zero emission and or biofuel by 2023. And we are working on electrification of the buses, and we have gas ferries. We'll probably be, maybe not be totally zero emission by 2023, but I think we'll be close. We're also building a 50-kilometer BRT, bus rapid transport line. It's also supposed to be finished by 2023. Financing instruments for us. We are we support and make grants to some projects related to universal approach, small towns more attractive, outdoor life, etc. But also we have regional funds that support business development, meaning giving loans, lending money. I mentioned Innovation Norway as well. That's a state instrument, state funds. They give loans to support and help start innovative businesses and help entrepreneurs getting started. Also, we have Enova. That's also government support to make houses more energy efficient. And these days, energy is, of course, very on the agenda. Also, I'd like to mention a mobility project that we're working on. Hjem Jobb Hjem is called. We're focusing on the travel from between home to work, because usually that's travel at peak hours, just one person in a car, causing congestion. And also we have, as everybody knows, the Paris Agreement, which is the goal to reduce emissions, traffic emissions. And we have extra financial support to cities and regions to fund actions to obtain that goal. And we're working, directed our work at active travel. We're trying to make more to travel by public transport, cycle and walk, instead of driving to work every day. As a project, we provide reduced fare on public transport to member companies, because we're signing agreements with companies and municipalities and public organizations, and also lending electric bikes to companies for testing. We also have electric city bikes placed in a city. Usually people pay for them, but it's free for members of this Hjem Jobb Hjem. And Columbus, again, is responsible and facilitator for the mobility team. Started now this autumn. Up to now, it has been, responsibility has been at the county council. And this is applicable only in Stavanger and the nearby counties for commuters. Oh. Thank you very much. And Gerd Sehud will probably want to add something about funding in Stavanger and actions in Stavanger.
Yeah, I would just like to add hello, everybody. I'm the coordinator of the Triangulum project in Stavanger. I just want to add some financial items to this discussion. The Smart City of Stavanger office is financed by the city itself. They co-finance projects within the Smart City, but they also finance it together with public-private partnership. On the national level, we also have some funding nationally, and we have to avoid cascade funding as in Europe. But through our Norwegian Research Council, we are able to finance projects through the JPI Urban Europe, if there are projects there, through the Norwegian Research Council, and there is also through Innovation Norway a strategic research innovation fund to provide funding for startups, etc., in their very beginning of their innovation phase. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Great. Thank you, Hank. We can see your presentation. Can you please also open your microphone so that we can hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, is my public still awake? I'll wake you up then.
Yes, we are.
How can I shift from one to another? Yes. Well, this is of course the big question that we are all searching for, the chicken that lays the golden eggs in smart cities. And this is a difficult road. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 use cases that have been gathered during the second assessment not so long ago in Eindhoven. And I could present them in one slide, like this one. And then I will try to zoom in as much as possible on the actual subject, which is not describing what's going on in these use cases, but what is the actual things that we can learn about financing and about the risks and how to cover these risks so that it becomes attractive for private business or users to get involved. Let me start with this one. This is a solar smart grid for apartment buildings with private home owners. On the left, that very blue part, you can see that's a sketch, a schedule of how you look when you look from the side to one of these buildings. In this case, it's a 4-story building, and on both sides of the building, there are apartments individually owned. Now, what does it do? It's a smart grid system that enables effective and flexible distribution of solar energy. Solar energy is being produced by EV panels on top of that building. That is not new. That is not innovative. That's just, let's say, a proven technology. But what is new is the part in which the different apartment owners can be involved or not. They can opt in or opt out. And they can do that by buying a percentage of the panels on the roof, or they can do that by leasing or paying a service fee from an ESCO that has installed these solar panels on the roof. So it means that apartment owners can take an initiative to do something about the sustainable energy solutions. And that is the most interesting element in it. So it's not the technology, but it's the organizational element, which is the real innovative part. If you look a little bit down and you look here, you see the partners involved. these are these house or apartment owners. It's the municipality, and it's an ESCO, which is an energy company, and in this case it's called in Dutch onze stroomfabriek, which is as much as our energy production facility. The return on investment for apartment owners is between 5 and 10 years. The total investment that was necessary to install this in this certain case was 180,000 euros. The longest period of time was taken in the planning and the development, because you can imagine that being a technologically working with a technology that's proven, but with an organizational aspect which is innovative, you will have to spend time with people living in these apartments and answering all kinds of questions that might arise, and developing together with them the solutions. The actual implementation period of this proven technology is just 3 months. If this can be proven successful, and this is one of the Triangulum sub-projects, so to speak, then it could unlock for about 1.4 million apartments privately owned in the Netherlands, which is about 20% of the total housing stock, a solution which enables apartment owners to act, to work from a perspective of either being driven by sustainable goals or being driven by making money. Okay, that's one that I would like to point out. This is the second one. This is also in the same lighthouse. It's in Eckartsvallebroek. And this is about a route of about 1.5 kilometers. It runs around 2 ponds. And from investigations in the neighborhood, we learned that people found this route, which is not lighted, a little bit scary at night, even during the day in the more darker periods of the year. And one of the things that people were asking for was maybe to light that route. This is going to take place, or is taking place right now, because it's being implemented and we are almost ready. But next to it, we've also installed an innovation because we were laying out a smart lighting route, and we leaned on the knowledge that was coming from Stripe S, and used that knowledge to come with an answer for a demand, which was also given or asked by the people in the neighborhood, which was, can we not turn it into a route that is more interactive as well as it is being lighted? For example, can we have it as a route where you can follow a certain lighting pattern, and this gives you a certain speed of walking or running, and that would help us to get people involved, and it would in the end hopefully lead to a more healthier living surrounding and a more active environment. The different parties involved here were the municipality and the local community. Was also a consultant, the Energy Bureau active. Philips and Heijmans provided hardware like the lamp posts and did the digging to connect the lamp posts. The technical university is involved with research, and Bruno, which is a Danish company, provides these embedded lights. To get this all done, we needed about 1.5 years, and then there were many sessions. First, there were 25 individual sessions with stakeholders in the area, and then 5 general sessions with people representing the local community were organized in that area to find out and to fine-tune what was going to be installed. The period of implementation is a half year, and on the 2nd of October it's going to be opened. The other element is that it is costing around 300, and I should have changed this figure, 312,000 euro, of which the municipal budget contributed 40,000 euro, the Horizon program 272,000 for hardware and consultancy, and then for the rest of the money that was needed and was paid by Horizon went to the consultant and to the company Bruno, which delivered these sensoring lights or these sensoring elements in the asphalt of the walking or running route. Yesterday I checked all the figures once more with the project manager, who really is responsible for implementation on the ground, and she said that the Energy Bureau and Bruno, the 2 smaller companies, also invested a lot of free time. This is never accounted for, but that is a fact, and it runs about 10% of their budget. This was not agreed beforehand, but it comes because they see so much potential in replication that they are quite willing to invest more time than they have been contracted for, because they think that it offers opportunities for further business. Then there is the technical university who is involved, and who has now agreed that they will be active for another 5 years in the cooperation with the municipality to upgrade this route and to develop via the student teams that they regularly have apps which can then create individual speeds being set by runners or walkers. Now these speeds are preset, and you just have to keep up with the yellow light flashing or the red light flashing. But they want to develop it into an individual facility that can be used by anyone with a smartphone. For this also there are several running and other sport associations and neighborhood groups involved, and in exchange for this extra use of the living lab by the technical university, they will keep monitoring and giving the monitored data back to the municipality, which will then share it with the neighborhood. Okay, that's my second one, and my third one is of a rather different nature. This is not part of Triangulum, but this is a center-based citizen initiative for environmental monitoring, and it's called AREAS. What does AREAS do? They have 32 sensors installed throughout the city. How did it start, and who are the partners at the moment? Citizen groups took the initiative. It was completely driven from volunteers who said we have to do something about the air quality in our city. The municipality was asked to also participate and saw that it could have some really resourceful and good things for their policy, which they had been setting on air quality. Universities from the Netherlands were involved, from Utrecht, from Twente, from Amsterdam, and since the last 1.5 years, there's also the Technical University in Eindhoven who joined, and there have been some cooperative associations involved, which came out of this first initiative of creating a more healthy city by working on air pollution. Now, normally, it works like this, that air pollution is measured, and then the data are given back to the city, and all kinds of groups start to hammer on the door of the city and say you have to do something about it, and you have to do something about it. Now, this initiative, it works from a different perspective. It says it's driven by citizens, but it is also sharing a co-production goal, meaning that a healthy city shown by clean air is a responsibility not only of the city, but also of the citizens involved. And that's a different perspective. If you look at the business case, this is something that I have not heard from Peter yet in his oversight of all kinds of different models. But this is really a social value model, because if you start and work from this common goal, joint goal, then and you lean on the initiatives of citizens, which are stimulated by small financial contributions of a municipality, because they have worked for 7 years now. They have been doing this implementation for 7 years, and they received, on average, in these 7 years, 100,000 euros per year from the city of Eindhoven. And this is a constant process, constant going on. The interesting thing is that also the new developments, all kinds of apps were developed. For example, people start to develop an app that tells you when to run and when not to run. Because you can imagine that if you do your running route alongside a busy road, the air is not as good as it is in the park. You can also expect that when you run between, let's say, 7:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning, you run in rush hour, it's not as good as when you do your running between 10 and 11:30, for example. So people are quite creative in finding new appliances to work with the data which come out of a sensor network that is covering the whole city. Okay, enough for that. When I look at a sort of a typology of the financing vehicles that are behind these three use cases, then financing, I have summed up here the numbers, which I will not go into again, but the first two, so this one and that one, they lean on a sort of blended financing with sources from mainly government, and only voluntarily by private companies, 10% of the budget based on replication opportunities. That's different for this social value model, because costs are relatively small for the governmental investment, especially when you look how many people are involved and in how many fields. Just a small start of looking at clean air is now evolving. And the benefits of this are some new businesses, some jobs, some change behavior of citizens because they have become aware and they share a common goal and they share also the common responsibility, reducing all kinds of other costs. Risks, I cannot say much about. The other two, the risks there are in the hands of the ESCO and the individual owner. There's not so much new on that because I have EV panels on my roof, and as an individual owner, I run all the risks, of course. But the ESCO company runs the risk in case of a lease or a service fee, and that includes also for the time of life of these EV panels that they will maintain and keep the contract and run the services that come along with it. The risk of this sensor is a maintenance contract, but that is contracted in the price of the buying of these sensors, so that has been covered for a period of 5 years. So that about financing and risk. And of course, this is a research for the golden egg. Many eggs will get broken. Might find one, and from there we will hope to find a lot of them. Thank you very much.